Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now. Sometimes the best trades are the ones you don't make. Sometimes the smartest decisions happen when general managers have the courage to walk away from the table, to resist the temptation of shiny objects, to trust their instincts even when the entire baseball world is screaming at them to pull the trigger. And right now, watching the New York Mets' front office stumble through what can only be described as one of the most questionable acquisitions of the offseason, Dodgers fans everywhere should be breathing a massive sigh of relief and thanking the baseball gods that their team had the wisdom to dodge what could have been a catastrophic bullet. The Mets just pulled off a trade that has the entire baseball universe scratching their heads in bewilderment. They've acquired Luis Robert Jr. from the Chicago White Sox in exchange for former top prospect Luis Angel Acuna and right-handed pitcher Truman Pauly. On paper, if you squint really hard and ignore basically everything that's happened over the last 2 years, Robert checks some boxes. Elite defensive center fielder with Gold Glove caliber tools, former All-Star with serious pedigree, Silver Slugger winner who once received legitimate MVP consideration, a player with the kind of five-tool potential that keeps scouts awake at night dreaming about what could be. But here's where reality crashes into fantasy like a fastball meeting a wooden bat. Peel back those superficial layers, dig into the actual performance data, examine the injury history, and you'll discover a $20 million question mark wrapped in medical concerns and 2 consecutive seasons of alarming decline that should terrify any organization betting their competitive future on a miraculous turnaround. Let's rewind the clock and establish the crucial historical context that makes this entire situation so deliciously ironic. Cast your mind back to July of 2024 when the baseball rumor mill was working overtime, churning out reports of a potential mega deal that would have reshaped the entire landscape of the National League. The Los Angeles Dodgers were reportedly orchestrating a massive 3-team blockbuster that would have simultaneously brought Luis Robert Jr., ace left-hander Garrett Crochet, and hard-throwing reliever Michael Kopech to Chavez Ravine in one absolutely audacious swoop. That deal, which had reporters frantically updating their Twitter feeds and fans losing their minds with speculation, ultimately collapsed before reaching the finish line. The reasons for that deal falling apart remain somewhat murky, lost in the fog of baseball's notorious code of silence. Some credible reports suggested medical concerns emerged during the evaluation process, red flags that gave the Dodgers pause about Robert's long-term durability. Other sources pointed to the White Sox's absolutely astronomical asking price, demands so steep that even an organization with the Dodgers' resources balked at the cost. Whatever the specific reason, whatever happened behind those closed doors during negotiations, Los Angeles made a decision that looks more brilliant with each passing month. They pivoted with the kind of championship-caliber precision that separates elite organizations from pretenders. Instead of mortgaging significant prospect capital for Robert's uncertain future, the Dodgers executed a different strategy entirely. They grabbed Michael Kopech from the White Sox in a separate transaction, acquiring the flame-throwing reliever without surrendering the farm system. They orchestrated a creative 3-way trade that brought Tommy Edman from the St. Louis Cardinals to Los Angeles, adding a versatile Swiss Army knife player who could contribute across multiple positions. Both acquisitions that came at a fraction of the cost that Robert would have demanded, contributed meaningfully and substantially to the Dodgers' 2024 championship run. Tommy Edman became an absolute postseason hero, delivering clutch hit after clutch hit when the lights shone brightest, playing Gold Glove caliber defense at multiple positions and providing the kind of winning intangibles that don't always show up in statistics but absolutely matter when championships are on the line. Meanwhile, as the Dodgers were hoisting their championship trophy and celebrating their World Series victory, Luis Robert Jr. remained stuck in Chicago, trapped in what can only be described as baseball purgatory with the worst team in the major leagues. The White Sox stumbled, staggered, and face-planted their way to a historically catastrophic 2024 season, losing an absolutely mind-boggling 121 games. Robert's individual performance throughout that nightmare season mirrored his team's struggles in ways that should concern anyone evaluating his future value. He posted a measly .224 batting average, an anemic on-base percentage that belonged in a pitcher's stat line, and a pathetic .657 OPS that ranked among the worst qualifying hitters in baseball. Injuries limited him to just 100 games, robbing him of opportunities to course-correct and find his rhythm. For a player earning $15 million that season, for someone supposedly in the prime of his career, those numbers weren't just disappointing, they were absolutely catastrophic. But maybe that was just a fluke, right? Maybe 2024 was an aberration, a perfect storm of bad luck and worse circumstances. Except Robert's 2025 season didn't provide even a shred of evidence supporting a rebound narrative. He hit .223 with a similarly pathetic .661 OPS, and injuries once again robbed him of approximately one-third of his season. These aren't minor slumps that every player experiences. These aren't temporary adjustments to a new league or mechanical tweaks that take time to implement. These are 2 consecutive years of genuinely subpar performance from a player who's supposed to be entering his absolute prime years, the seasons when athletes typically post their best numbers and provide maximum value. Luis Robert Jr. turned 28 years old in August of 2025, which means the Mets aren't gambling on a young prospect with untapped potential. They're betting $20 million on a comeback from a player whose best season is now 3 full years in the rearview mirror, fading further into history with each passing month. That distance matters enormously in baseball, where careers can turn on a dime and windows of excellence often close faster than anyone anticipates. Let's talk honestly about that 2023 season because it's the entire foundation upon which this gamble rests. That year, Robert absolutely raked, slashing .264, .315, .542 with 38 home runs, 80 runs batted in, and 20 stolen bases. He earned a deserved All-Star selection, finished with legitimate MVP votes, and took home a Silver Slugger Award recognizing his offensive excellence. His combination of raw power, elite speed, and Gold Glove defense in center field made him one of the most valuable and exciting players in all of baseball. Watching him play that season was genuinely thrilling, the kind of performance that makes you understand why teams fall in love with five-tool potential. But baseball history, cruel and unforgiving, is absolutely littered with cautionary tales of players who had 1 or 2 elite seasons and then never recaptured that magic. Bodies break down, swings get longer, pitchers make adjustments, and suddenly the player who looked like a superstar becomes merely average or worse. The Mets are betting $20 million in salary for 2026, plus the prospect capital they surrendered that Luis Robert Jr. magically returns to his 2023 form, despite showing zero evidence of moving in that direction. That's not calculated risk based on data and trends. That's wishful thinking dressed up in the fancy clothes of roster construction, hope masquerading as strategy. Now let's examine what this trade really represents when placed in the broader context of the Mets' absolutely chaotic offseason. After missing out on superstar outfielder Kyle Tucker, who was dealt to the Chicago Cubs in a blockbuster trade that reshaped the National League Central, the Mets found themselves in full-blown panic mode. Steve Cohen's billions couldn't buy Tucker because the Houston Astros weren't interested in money, only prospects, and the Mets either couldn't or wouldn't meet their price. Reports surfaced almost immediately that New York was in an absolutely mad scramble to sign Cody Bellinger, the former National League MVP who's been seeking a long-term deal that would provide financial security. Bellinger certainly has his flaws, issues that any honest evaluation must acknowledge. His strikeout rate has remained elevated throughout his career, a swing-and-miss tendency that can be exploited by good pitching. His power numbers have declined from his peak MVP season when he looked like the next great Dodger. His consistency has been frustrating, alternating between stretches where he looks like an all-star and periods where he seems completely lost at the plate. But here's what Cody Bellinger brings to the table that Luis Robert Jr. doesn't. 3 consecutive solid seasons of production without catastrophic decline, proven postseason experience including a World Series championship ring, defensive versatility to play both corner outfield positions and first base competently, and a track record of staying relatively healthy compared to Robert's injury-plagued recent history. Bellinger is a known commodity, a player whose floor and ceiling are well established. You know exactly what you're getting, for better or worse. Instead of landing Bellinger and acquiring that reliability, the Mets pivoted to Luis Robert Jr., a player with theoretically higher upside if everything breaks perfectly, but a catastrophically lower floor if his injuries continue or his performance doesn't rebound. And here's the absolutely delicious irony that should have Mets fans grinding their teeth in frustration. By removing themselves from the Bellinger sweepstakes, by pivoting away from that pursuit, the Mets might have inadvertently done their crosstown rivals an enormous favor. The New York Yankees were always the most logical destination for Bellinger's services. He fits their lineup construction beautifully, providing left-handed power in a ballpark that favors that profile. He brings championship pedigree to a clubhouse that demands winning. Now that path is completely clear, gift-wrapped and delivered by the Mets' desperation and questionable decision-making. Let's examine what the Mets actually surrendered to acquire this damaged goods gamble. Luis Angel Acuna isn't just any generic prospect floating around the lower levels of the minor leagues. He's a former top 100 talent who carries legitimate pedigree and happens to share bloodlines with Ronald Acuna Jr. of the Atlanta Braves, one of baseball's most electrifying superstars. While Luis Angel hasn't reached his cousin's stratospheric heights or shown that same level of transcendent ability, he's demonstrated flashes of genuine potential in his limited major league exposure, including impressive speed on the base paths and defensive versatility that allows him to play multiple positions. Those are exactly the kinds of traits that developing players sometimes refine into consistent major league production. Truman Pauly represents the kind of young pitching depth that rebuilding organizations absolutely covet and smart front offices protect jealously. He's not a frontline starter prospect who's going to anchor a rotation, but he's exactly the type of arm that could develop into a solid middle rotation piece or valuable bullpen weapon. For a White Sox organization staring down a multi-year rebuild, needing to accumulate as many lottery tickets as possible, acquiring young controllable players like Acuna and Pauly represents genuinely smart asset management. These are the kinds of moves that might not make headlines, but build sustainable winning organizations over time. From Chicago's perspective, this trade is actually a significant victory worth celebrating. They dumped Luis Roberts' escalating contract, which jumps to $20 million in 2026 and includes a $20 million club option for 2027 that would have handcuffed their flexibility. They acquired young talent that fits perfectly with their rebuilding timeline, players who might contribute when the White Sox are actually ready to compete again. General Manager Chris Getz can legitimately point to this deal as evidence of shrewd maneuvering, turning a depreciating asset into future building blocks. But for the Mets, they're paying premium prices for damaged goods while their division rivals continue strengthening and widening the competitive gap. The Philadelphia Phillies just added left-handed ace Jesus Luzardo to a rotation that already features Zach Wheeler, Aaron Nola, and Ranger Suarez. That's a legitimately terrifying quartet of starting pitchers that can match up against anyone in a playoff series. They're going all in on their championship window, making aggressive moves that signal serious intent. The Atlanta Braves still boast one of the most talented rosters in baseball despite some injury setbacks. Ronald Acuna Jr. is returning from his ACL injury with something to prove. Spencer Strider is coming back from Tommy John surgery, bringing his electric fastball back to the rotation. Their young core of Austin Riley, Matt Olson, and Ozzie Albies remains intact and entering their prime years. And the Mets? They're desperately hoping that Luis Roberts' hamstrings, hip flexors, and wrists suddenly become bulletproof. They're crossing their fingers that his swing mechanics magically click back into place after 2 years of struggles. They're praying that the player who showed up in 2023 somehow reappears despite no evidence suggesting that's remotely likely. Here's the cold financial reality that makes this entire situation even more frustrating for Mets fans. Their 2026 payroll is tracking close to their 2025 levels, just as owner Steve Cohen promised when he took control of the franchise. But this wasn't the spending spree that fans envisioned when a billionaire hedge fund manager bought their team. They thought unlimited resources meant signing Shohei Ohtani-level superstars every single winter, building an unstoppable juggernaut that would dominate the National League East for a decade. Instead, they're getting players coming off their worst seasons, damaged goods acquired at premium prices, and questionable roster construction that looks more desperate than strategic. So where exactly does this leave the Dodgers in all of this chaos? Sitting pretty, that's where, looking absolutely brilliant for trusting their evaluation process and walking away from a deal that looked tempting on the surface but carried enormous risk beneath. The front office deserves enormous credit for their discipline, for resisting the siren song of Luis Roberts' tools and potential, for prioritizing proven contributors like Tommy Edman, who could help them win immediately. Dodgers fans should be celebrating this near miss like it's a championship victory itself. Imagine if Los Angeles had surrendered significant prospect capital for Robert back in July of 2024. Imagine if he'd spent the last season and a half struggling with injuries and producing underwhelming numbers in Dodger blue instead of in Chicago. Imagine the frustration, the second guessing, the endless debates about whether the front office made a catastrophic mistake. Instead, the Dodgers won a World Series with players who actually contributed, who stayed healthy, who performed when it mattered most. The Mets are now stuck in baseball's most uncomfortable position, the worst place a franchise can possibly find itself. They're too expensive to rebuild, carrying too much payroll, committed to underperforming players to tear everything down and start fresh. But they're also too flawed to truly contend against the elite teams in their own division, much less the powerhouses lurking in the National League West. Luis Robert gives them elite defense in center field. That much is undeniable. His glove work remains spectacular, even when his bat disappears. If his offensive production somehow returns to even 80% of his 2023 form, if the injuries miraculously stop, if everything breaks perfectly, then maybe this trade looks like genius in retrospect. But that's a massive if, an enormous assumption built on hope rather than evidence or recent performance trends. The White Sox are laughing all the way through their rebuild right now. They dumped a contract that was becoming problematic, acquired young talent that fits their timeline perfectly, and convinced a desperate competitor to overpay for their damaged goods. Meanwhile, the Mets are throwing money at problems and hoping something sticks, operating without a coherent plan beyond trying to avoid embarrassment. Will Luis Robert Jr. prove everyone wrong? Will he stay healthy for an entire season and rediscover the power stroke that made him so dangerous in 2023? It's certainly possible. Baseball is absolutely full of comeback stories, redemption arcs, and players who looked finished before experiencing career revivals. Human beings are resilient, athletes are capable of adjustments and improvements, and sometimes a change of scenery provides exactly the spark a struggling player needs. But betting $20 million plus premium prospects on that possibility, gambling your competitive window on hope instead of evidence, that's not championship roster construction. That's crossing your fingers, closing your eyes, and hoping for magic to happen. That's the kind of move that desperate organizations make when they're running out of options and patience. The Los Angeles Dodgers, meanwhile, continue operating with the kind of strategic brilliance that has made them baseball's model franchise. They trusted their process, they walked away from a questionable deal, and they won a championship as a direct result of that discipline. Sometimes the best moves are the ones you don't make, and avoiding the Luis Robert gamble might end up being one of the smartest non-moves in recent Dodgers history. All right, Dodger faithful, drop your honest take in the comments section below. Are you relieved that your team avoided this potential disaster? Do you think the Mets just made a massive mistake that will haunt them for years? Smash that like button if you think the Dodgers front office deserves enormous credit for their discipline and strategic vision. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we're tracking every move this offseason, analyzing every transaction, and giving you the unfiltered truth that the mainstream media won't touch. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our analysis. This offseason is getting absolutely wild, and we're here to break down every twist, turn, and questionable decision. The Dodgers are positioned beautifully for another championship run while their competitors stumble through ill-advised gambles. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's celebrate smart organizational decisions, and let's appreciate what it means to have a front office that actually knows what they're doing. Until next time, stay loyal to the blue, trust the process, and remember that sometimes the best trades are the ones you never make.